guys, it's Kevin again. So, as you might remember, earlier this year, I talked about how I was not going to be doing any 2023 what I watched videos. I was just going to do away with it entirely just because, like, I was too far behind. I didn't think I was going to have the time to catch up. I didn't want to get further behind on stuff, and you know, I just thought that it would be a good idea to kind of just, not do those videos moving forward. But as promised, I did say I would still do a video talking about my favorites and least favorite movies of 2023. And well, after, I don't know, 300 something films later, I'm finally going to do that video. I know that this is still pretty late. I intended to get this video out last month. Things kept getting put on the back burner and I wasn't able to do it, but I'm finally doing it now. And listen, it's only May, it's not too far in the year to where I don't think I can justify it. I think it's still early enough. We're in still the first half of 2023, 2024. What fucking year is it at this point? 2024, there we go, to where I can still justify doing this video. But I will say right up front, this is not going to be the video that you are used to, because normally when I do like end of the year stuff for movies, I usually do a best and worst video, but I figured that like it's been so long, I don't really see a reason to do two individual videos, so why not just take those two videos and instead combine them into one? So yeah, that's basically what we're going to do here. As you did see, this is best and worst of 2023. So let me explain how this is going to work. Basically, I'm going to simultaneously talk about, the films that I liked the most and the least throughout the year, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to do like 10 through 6 for the best, and then 10 through 6 for the worst, then 5 to 2 for the best, and then 5 to 2 for the worst. You get how it's going to go. Ultimately going to the best and worst movie of 2023. And I think this is probably the easiest way to get it done. It's going to be a lot smoother. I don't have to worry about putting out two videos. It's going to get out a lot faster, and I think overall I'm very excited to get to do this. With that said, the one thing I will not be doing here is honorable and dishonorable mentions, just because I don't think it makes sense to do that in this video. I feel like it would just be a little too messy, considering I am going back and forth between best and worst, and so if you want to see like what some honorable mentions will be, I'll post a comment talking about like what my honorable mentions and dishonorable mentions would be and things like that. But just again, because this is late, I'm not going to talk about that here. Also, immediately after uploading this video, I'm going to finally make my list of all 2023 movies that I watch. The ranked list I do, I'm finally going to make that public, so you'll be able to see all of that there. And of course, before, just like any year when I do these videos, I'm going to throw out a few disclaimers here. This is my list, so, there are going to be some movies here that you may or may not agree with, and that's okay. I think it's, I don't think there's a problem where it's like, well, why is this on your list, but this isn't? It's my list. It's that simple. My list is not going to be the same as everybody else's, and I think that that's something that, I think that's just something that we have to respect and things like that. So, yeah, it's my list, and that's all I'm going to say. Because here's the thing. Contrary to popular belief, while I don't think 2023 was an especially strong year for, like, blockbusters, I do think overall this was a pretty good year for movies. There were a lot of films that I really did love quite a bit, that I would have constantly been thinking about and that I've been very excited to do a video for. Was sad that I didn't get to do a full review for it, and this kind of makes up for it that way. But also, I think, again, if we're talking about, like, smaller films, I mean, this was just such a fantastic year all around. So I'm very excited to finally get to talk about these movies. And then on the worst side of things, I think some of these films I'm talking about, while they were terrible, they're not quite on the level of some other years. Like, there's still truly some terrible movies I'm talking about here, but they're not quite on the level of some of the other movies I have talked about. So overall, I don't think 2023 was as bad as a year as people have been proclaiming it to be. Like I said, I think if we're judging it based off of, like, major blockbusters and things like that, yeah, it was a pretty shitty year. But if we, look beyond that, I think there was a lot actually that 2023 had to offer in terms of really good stuff. But again, I'm gonna stop rambling here. Let's just get into it. All right, so just because I do want to end this video on a positive note, I think we're gonna start off with the worst here. So we're gonna go ahead, start off with the 10 through 6 worst movies of 2023, starting off with number 10. Oh my god, old dads. Listen, this was a bad year for Netflix just all around, whether it be comedies, dramas. I mean, the people are really just starting to notice just how fake and just how artificial so many, and just how little to offer so many of these Netflix films really have. But I think 2023 was an especially horrible year for Netflix, and Old Dads is absolutely one of their worst films that they had last year. I mean, talk about just such a one-joke premise. And listen, there are some good actors here, but their talent is completely squandered. Bill Burr, Bobby Cannavale, and Bokeem Woodbine, all three are really good actors, but they're essentially just reduced to these three men who are somehow so behind with the times that they can't seem to understand why the things they are saying is not funny, why it's offensive. So much of the film is centered around their cluelessness and centered around their ignorance. And while there definitely is some merit to that, after a while, when you just keep recycling the same joke over and over again, it just becomes really exhausting to watch. And that's really the best example of this. The characters were uninteresting. The story itself, again, was just really one note. It never really evolved behind the premise that it was trying to go for. And overall, it's just such a unfunny comedy that I really just couldn't stand it all. Again, Netflix, I don't know what is going on. You really just don't need to sign on to every single project that's given to you. It seems like they're finally learning their lesson. They're not putting out nearly as many films as they did last year, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna not continue to distribute films like this, because we still have movies coming out like this very year, and I just don't know what it's gonna take at this point. I feel like at this point I'm about as relevant as the old men in this movie in terms of like me talking about this. Like, I've gone on about this for years. I don't even think it's worth getting into anymore, but my god, this was insufferable to watch. One True Loves is basically a Lifetime movie you would stumble upon back in the day, except it happens to have some very talented actors. Philippa Sue and Simu Liu, for some reason, are in this movie. Luke Bracey as well. And it is every bit as sappy and melodramatic as you expect it to be. The premise itself is just so been there, done that. You have this guy who's seemingly killed in a plane crash, and then his wife has moved on. She's gonna, marry some other guy, and then, oh my god, he's alive, and this upends their entire relationship, and it just goes down every predictable beat that you can take it. And the problem is the movie just takes itself so deathly seriously that it really just has no sort of it really has no sort of self-awareness in that way. It is trying to be something really emotional, it is trying to be something really sweet, and it just comes across as so half-baked and just phony to me that I just could not at all take what was going on here seriously. But that's really just to the film's detriment. It's so incredibly cringy to watch. The characters also, there's no chemistry between them whatsoever. Luke Bracey seems like he just does not want to be here at all. Simu Liu's the only one who's like putting actual effort in here, but overall I could not stand this film whatsoever. Listen, there's definitely an audience out there, but I am very much not one of them. Really hated this one. So remember Quibi? Remember when that was a thing in 2020? I remember I was going to do a video on that initially, and then Quibi just kind of became became as relevant as it was when it started, which is that it wasn't relevant at all. It was a shitty idea from the beginning. Maybe when the pandemic wasn't going on, it would have worked out, with people watching this stuff before they get on a bus or whatever. That was literally their pitch for it, like 6-minute bite content. But yeah, so that was the thing, and a lot of their shows, came and went. Nobody really watched them. But then for some reason, they feel that there's still value there, that some of these shows that were designed to be watched in 6-minute chunks should, for some reason, be revitalized. But we're not going to revitalize it entirely. We're going to, put it as it is, but we're going to try to put it as a cohesive film and try to see, can this work as a feature-length film? And, well, you can see the problem problem with this, because that is entirely the issue with Die Hard here. This is a film that was designed to really never be one. There are so many moments where it feels like this is supposed to be the end. There's supposed to be credits here. This does not feel like it is going together at all. There's so many things that wrap up so quickly. I never feel like I have a full understanding of what's going on here. And then you have Kevin Hart, who, look, there was a point where I really liked him as a comedian, but I feel like his shtick is just so tiring at this point. How many more jokes are we going to get about him being little? How many jokes are we going to get about him, you know, just screaming a lot and being put in all these ridiculous situations? Like, there's nothing more that he does in this movie than you kind of expect him to, and this is probably one of his worst roles to date. You have so many actors who are wasted. John Travolta, I have no idea what he's doing in this, but my God, he is just continuing to go on a downward spiral as an actor, and it's just really sad to see. It starts off and it's trying to be like sort of I think like a meta commentary about Kevin Hart, but then it turns into this like action type thing, and there's horrible comedy throughout. Just stay away from this one. It was released on a service that nobody really watched, and nobody really watched the movie as well. There's a second season apparently on the Roku channel, so I guess you can check it out there, but like, my God, I don't know what they were thinking turning this into a feature-length film, but like, there need to be some serious retooling here, and they didn't even try to like make this cohesive. They literally just kept it as it is, and I'm not gonna lie to you, when I was watching this, I was watching the, you know, the bite-sized chunks of it, like side by side, to see if there's anything they changed, and there's literally, aside from scene transitions, like barely anything they changed here whatsoever, and, well, you can just see the inherent problem from that alone. This was just such an unbearable watch all around. I am perfectly fine with taking a piece of media and trying to turn it into something else, but there need to be some retooling, and when instead you just try to, you know, take the same thing and put it all together, it feels less like a cohesive film and more just like someone took an entire thing and just tried to turn it into a full-length thing for YouTube. But yet I've seen YouTube edits that are even better than this. So someone took the entire Obi-Wan Kenobi series and put it into one movie, and that is edited better than the schlock we have here. Just such an incredibly lazy and baffling watch all around. I don't know why I even bothered with this one, but something about Beautiful Disaster just intrigued me from the ridiculousness of it. This whole premise of this girl that likes this guy, but like she doesn't want to admit that she likes him, so she makes this bet where if he, you know, loses this fight, then he's gonna stop having sex, then he can't have sex for a month, but then if he wins the fight, then she has to live in his apartment and he can do basically whatever he wants with her. It's every bit as cringy as you expect it to be, but yet it's also, I think, trying to be like this deconstruction and sort of like a parody of things like 50 Shades of Grey and things like that, and that alone seemed intriguing if that's what the movie wanted to be, but the problem is the film can't make up its mind. One second we have this ridiculous scene of the two of them having sex and literally like destroying their apartment as they're doing it. It's obviously supposed to be funny. The next we have this really shocking reveal that seems like it's trying to take itself seriously. So it really is a film that has this huge identity crisis throughout, but the entire thing feels so upended by terrible direction and just completely inept, this completely inept screenplay that seems to just kind of make itself up as it goes along. And again, if that was the intention, it really does not come off that way. It really feels like they did not know what they wanted this to be. If they wanted this to be funny or if they wanted to take this a bit more seriously. The dialogue is just horrendously bad throughout this. It's also frankly pretty sexist to watch. Even though I think the film was trying to be a deconstruction of these things, it doesn't change the fact that they don't do anything to try to not make this come off as offensive as possible. Dylan Sprout's character especially, I could not stand in this movie, and his performance is easily one of the worst of last year. His attempt to be this like really just like rebellious guy just really doesn't work whatsoever. It's one of the poorest attempts at parody I have seen seen in a very long time. It's also one of those movies where, like, they keep inserting the most ridiculous plot twists every few seconds. I really do think this could have worked, but in the hands of Roger Kumble, who is literally the director of the thing that they are trying to parody, I don't know what they were really thinking here. I don't know if they were really thinking. I feel like they had this idea. They thought, wouldn't it be funny if we did this? And they didn't stop to think, does this make any sense? Does this actually work as a movie? And the answer is, I really don't think it does. This was just such a disaster. It was not a beautiful disaster. It was really just a disaster throughout, and is the most confounding films I've seen in just a very long time. I really have no idea what they were trying to go for here, but my god, this was just absolutely awful. I can't believe this shit actually got a sequel, especially because it was a Fathom event for like a day. I didn't think anybody really saw it, but hey, I guess we'll see how that goes. Since I'm talking about this one, I probably will eventually get around to that one, but my god, I really just don't know why they keep making these stupid fucking movies. Nobody's seeing them, nobody wants them, but I guess because I'm talking about them right now, maybe I'm just part of the problem, but whatever, they exist and they're terrible, so woo. Teen Wolf was one of the first shows I really ever talked about on this channel, so any, idea of them making a movie was going to be something that I was going to get excited for. But then the movie gets announced, and there's all these rumors going on. The movie's basically in production hell. You got people dropping out. You got new people signing on. You got Jeff Davis changing the movie, like, so many different times. So my hopes already weren't pretty high for this, but then I saw it, and my god, it was so much worse than I could have imagined it to be. Starting from the fact that the movie itself just looks so incredibly cheap. The effects look PS2 level in terms of what they're trying to do. Anytime they show, like a wolf or something like that in this, it is so incredibly unconvincing. And look, the effects in the original show, they weren't the best, but they were not at all on this level. I mean, this just looks so incredibly cheap, and the thing is, they had so much time to work on this, so it's inexcusable that the movie just looks as rushed and cobbled together as it really does. You have a ton of actors here that some of which clearly just do not want to be here whatsoever. So many of these actors just feel like their talents are completely wasted in this movie, and again, some of which just seem like they don't even want to be here. Colton Haynes, his character here, literally, of Jackson, is just trying to figure out why he's even in the movie. He's trying to figure out his purpose in the film, and to me, that just reads as they didn't know what his purpose was. They just wanted to get Colton Haynes back because they wanted Colton Haynes back, but they had no idea what to really do with him. You have other actors here that are definitely trying, like Tyler Hoechlin is not doing a bad job in this movie, but then for all the Tyler Hoechlins, you have someone like he's not bad in this movie. Tyler Posey's not bad either. Like, most of the performances aren't bad here, but then for all of that, you have the worst screenplay that, I cannot imagine that this is the screenplay that they went with. It is the definition of, like, the kind of thing that just seems like a first draft, but it doesn't even seem like a completed first draft. It just seems like a series of ideas that don't really go together whatsoever. Them reviving a character and basically just destroying her character in seconds. Everything they did with her in this movie is just so incredibly disrespectful to what they were trying to do. So many of the characters in this, they seem to completely misunderstand. And again, it's not like this film is in the hands of new talent. These are people who worked on the show. These are people who understood the show, and it's like they don't even understand the material that they wrote. They don't understand the the characters that work so well on the show. They just destroy their legacy in seconds. Not to mention, you bring back the Nagitsune, but you take away, but yet you don't bring back the two most important characters of that storyline, so it renders that entire storyline so incredibly hollow and useless. And then the third act of this movie, all the ideas they go for, they just could not help themselves in coming up with the most ridiculous shit possible, but yet leaving it in the movie, never once thinking, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe this is a bad idea. No, let's just leave that in there. That's a good idea. We'll just keep that in. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter if it comes out of left field. It doesn't matter if it's so laughably stupid. We'll just leave it in there anyway. I truly cannot believe how this turned out. Just one of the most anger-inducing things I watched last year. Listen, I didn't have very high hopes for this going in, but I truly could not have expected them to make something this incredibly lazy and this little effort put into it. It really just seems like this is something where they had a movie, they wanted to rush it out as quickly as possible, and they put very little thought into what actually worked here. But if you want to watch something that just destroys your legacy of a show in seconds and destroys any sort of good faith that this show had moving forward, I mean, really look no further than this film. I cannot believe this is the story they decided to go with. I cannot believe this is, what they decided to put these characters through, what they thought after so many years the fans would be interested in. Teen Wolf was already on a down spiral in the last season, and this just made it so much worse that I think it really just showed, it really just ruined any sort of relevance and any sort of good faith the show had moving forward. I feel like there's been a lot of revivals lately that just really didn't need to happen, and this was easily one of them. I think that they had an idea here, and they just didn't really know where they wanted to go with it. It's just the definition of, why, just because you could do something doesn't mean that you should, and I really think Jeff Davis needed to say this to himself. This was just so incredibly pathetic to watch. I can't believe this is what they decided to go with, but easily one of those anger-inducing things I watched last year. All right, well, now that we got that out of the way, let's transition a bit and go to the best movies of 2023, starting off with number 10. All of Us Strangers is one of the most cathartic and heart-wrenching films I have seen in a very long time. It's just the perfect example of what could really happen if you were able to talk to the loved ones that were left behind, those conversations you never got to have, those moments that maybe you took for granted. What if you got to relive them? This film really just dives into all of that as we see this character that he is going through a phase in his life where he is reflecting a lot on his past. He is reflecting a lot on things he really just didn't get to do, and just showing how grief, even years later, has never really left him. The way this movie portrays mourning, I think, is just so incredibly well done, and it's a real shame that it wasn't able to get the accolades that it really deserved, because Andrew Scott just gave such a phenomenal performance in this film. It's one of the most moving I saw of last year. I mean, the character of Adam in general, I think even if you can't relate to everything about him, there's going to be something you can latch onto here, whether, again, it's the regret that he has in the way he left a conversation, or what he didn't get to say, or what he's still struggling with. I mean, there's so much to really latch onto here, and how that is reflecting this current relationship that he's now trying to pursue, I thought was just so incredibly well done. The connection that he's facing there, but also, battling that with the connections he doesn't get to have anymore, I think is just so well done in this movie. Andrew High's direction also is just such top notch in this film. He portrays this in such a interesting way, but it's such a, I think, realistic and visceral way of portraying grief. One second, this is a, this too good to be true dreamlike scenario for Adam, and the next, it's downright a nightmare and something that he wants out of immediately. And it really keeps you on your toes until the end, where it goes in a direction that I really didn't expect it to, but really just brought home the message of this film that much more. It's such a incredibly powerful film, and it's definitely a hard one to watch, but it's one that I really have not been able to get out of my head the more I think about it. It's the kind of film that I think you're gonna want to go back to, you're gonna want to be thinking about for a very long time. But if you need a movie that I think just really just helps you understand and fully confront grief, I don't think there is a better recommendation I can give you for a 2023 film than All of Us Strangers. It's one of the most soulful and moving portrayals of it that I have ever seen, and a film that I just really wish got a lot more talk about. There were people who talked about it, but I feel like this film overall, it didn't get the love that it really needed to, and I really wish that it did. Please, if you did not get to see it, I cannot recommend this one enough. While Anatomy of a Fall seems pretty straightforward at first, it quickly unravels into something so much more profound. It's much more of this characters. It's much less of this straightforward mystery on whether or not the character of Sandra, quote unquote, did it or did not do it. it is much more of this character study of seeing this woman and her unraveling and her trying to do what she can to keep everything together and not let this case ruin her family and everything else that she's built. And in that way, it is one of the most gripping and pulse-pounding films or stories of anything that I saw last year. I mean, Sandra Hüller is just absolute perfection in this movie, giving such a powerhouse performance, fully diving into the layers of Sandra as to, showing her vulnerability and what she was really going through within the situation, but also getting you to understand what may have potentially led her to kill her husband and how their relationship was and, how things really were before everything happened. I think she just does such a great job of bringing that to life. But we also have to talk about the amazing child performance here from Milo Machado Grainer, who generally just gives one of the best I think I've ever seen, especially in this impassioned monologue that he just poured his heart and soul into. The dog Snoop is possibly the greatest dog actor you'll see ever, especially in one scene involving something water. That's all I'm gonna say. Just absolute perfection. But it's Justine Triet's directing that really just elevates this film, pouring so many emotions into this and really just taking this story in such a unconventional direction. The mystery element is always present. It is always there, but again, she presents this in way more authentic manner than you would expect it to. The way this film is diving into the way this case affects everyone, but also the way the media is portraying it and the effect that that has on Sandra, I thought was just so incredibly well done in this. The courtroom scenes are very riveting, but the scenes outside the courtroom are just as interesting and things that you really just find yourself latching onto. This is just absolutely one of the most powerful watches of the entire year. You've seen a lot of courtroom dramas out there, but you really have seen nothing quite like this before. Cannot wait to see what else Justine Triet ends up doing within her career. I haven't seen her other films prior to this, but I really feel like she's going to be a big name. The fact that she was awarded Best Original Screenplay definitely should not be overlooked and should be enough an incentive to watch this one. It comes on Criterion very soon. When it does, give yourself give it a shot and watch it. One of the a very powerful watch, and especially an ending shot that I will not be forgetting anytime soon. It's a movie that doesn't really give you a lot of answers. It's more so presenting questions, but it makes it that much more interesting in doing so. It is such a introspective watch in that way, and it's one of the most captivated I was by any film last year. To say last year was a rough year for Marvel, I think would really be a huge understatement. I mean, my God, they just had failure after failure, but they did have one bright spot in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and a very deserving one at that. I mean, this film practically reminds us of what made this series work so well in the first place. We have one director here in James Gunn who has had one vision throughout the entire time and is finally getting to achieve that. He doesn't really care about the connections to the previous films or previous entries that are non-Guardians related. He doesn't really care about Easter eggs and things like that. He's just trying to tell his story, and he does it incredibly well here. The way this film is fleshing out all these characters, it just really shows you how much they have overcome and how much they all have grown, whether it's Peter and where he ends up going in this movie, or what they end up doing with Gamora. The story of what they do with Drax in particular is phenomenal here, and Dave Bautista just continues to show how incredible of an actor he is. But it's the focus on Rocket and the way we really unpack the cruelty that he has faced throughout his life and all of the strife and violence that he has gone through that has led him to find his chosen family, and gets us to really see this character in a whole new light that makes him nothing short of one of the best characters within the MCU. That's what really elevates this film. It's the risk the Gunn is taking. He goes to some very dark places in this movie, but it never feels unearned. It never feels like the movie is trying to overcompensate with darkness. It feels like this is what the story that Gunn has been telling all along, and it just so happens that we're finally now getting it in this movie. with a villain that is so incredibly infuriating, but yet also someone that you are so utterly compelled by because of how good Chukwudi Iwuji is in that performance. The incredible action sequences, especially a one take that I'm sure you will never forget if you haven't seen it before. It is just such a stunning sequence all around. This is just everything we really want in an MCU film. Strip back all the constant references to things and ridiculous bits of trying to connect this film to this film. Just try to tell these singular stories that feel special and personal. This feels like that throwback in that way, and I really hope the MCU takes note of what this film was able to accomplish. Like I said, I think they've had a really rough go of it, but this is a perfect example of what you can do when you don't have to worry about all of that, when you just are trying to focus on what the story that you're trying to tell. This is both the Guardian swan song, but it's also James Gunn's swan song, and it very much does feel that way. This is just hands down one of the best films that the MCU has given us in quite a bit. I was just so blown away by the story they ended up telling here, where they obtained these characters. They went to some very unexpected, but very deserving, but very, I think, very earned directions that I really wasn't expecting them to take, but yet feels so right for these characters. The comedy has never been sharper, but again, it's the it's the focus on character that really just makes this such a special film. Guardians remains one of the most consistent elements of the MCU, and Volume 3 is a perfect example as to why really just cannot get in. I really just could not love this one any more than I did. Really was just so blown away by this film all around. I feel like it's been kind of forgotten, which is a shame, but it started off the summer movie season last year on a real high note, and unfortunately, it may not have continued the MCU on the greatest note, but at least we have this film to show. They sometimes still have the juice, and I think if there's any way to get back on track, it is to look at this film as a blueprint for what they need to do moving forward, and hopefully that can get them back to the way things used to be, because this is just such an amazing example of what can be accomplished when someone is able to tell a story to their fullest vision and not be compromised by all these other things they have to connect to. Just bravo to James Gunn all around. Cannot wait to see what he brings to the DC universe once that starts up next year. John Wick Chapter 4 is going to be, I think, a landmark in terms of action films for a very long time. Many films are going to try to replicate its success, and I don't think many are going to get there. This is just the perfect example of what you can do when you just go all out with an action film and really just hold nothing back, and that is the perfect example of this one. The story that they have been telling all along really feels like it has been leading up to this. We have all these different characters, we have all these different locations we end up going to, but yet it never feels overstuffed. It never feels like there is too much going on here. It feels like the film is just doubling down on everything that the previous three films did so well, but yet also is telling a truly epic story that is nothing short of the best entry we've gotten in this franchise yet. The action, continues to be just some of the best within any franchise out there. It's so high octane. It has you white-knuckled with tension throughout, and it's one of those films where every single action scene is so much more chaotic and so much more heightened than the last. The last 40 minutes of this movie in particular just takes you on this wild ride and really just never lets you go, particularly a scene involving a motorcycle chase of sorts was just one of the most adrenaline pumping things that I have seen in a very long time. But what's even more impressive beyond those big action set pieces is that they never once feel similar. They always are doing something different. There's always different sort of camera angles and things like that. There's a 360 one in particular that a lot of people have talked about that is among some of the best moments in any movie that I saw last year. There's so many well-constructed sequences here, but the stunt work, again, is just truly something that needs to be commended. I don't understand how they're able to accomplish it. I don't think I'll ever understand how they're able to accomplish it. The lengths that Keanu Reeves goes here is just absolutely insane. He is such a madman, and he continues to push himself to his limits in a way that I feel like I've seen him do everything that he can, and yet he continues to surprise me here. I think he gives such a phenomenal performance, but also does some really great stunt work here. Some great characters here as well, which is something that the other franchise had, but none of them have been as memorable as the ones we get here, whether it's Shamir Anderson's character, Mr. Nobody, or Rina Sawayama's, who, despite not being in the movie that much, still leaves a really big impression. I think they are both really great here, but Donnie Yen is just so great in this movie, adding so much humanity and emotion to a character who could have easily been very one-note, but finding a way to bring so many layers to him that generally gets you to care for him just as much as you do for Wick. Also having, I think, easily the best villain in the franchise so far, in Bill Skarsgård's character. So conniving and manipulative, but so memorable in that way with the places they end up going with him. There really isn't a single actor here that missed a beat, and I think in general the movie itself did not miss a beat. A phenomenal score, a gripping ending that goes in so many surprising directions. I know they have more films planned for this franchise, but I really could not think of a better way to wrap things up than they do in Chapter 4 here. It honestly kind of makes me, it makes it like I'm excited to see what else they're going to do, but yet I also wish they could just end it here, because the way they wrap things up just feels so incredibly satisfying the way this went. I've really enjoyed the franchise up to this point, but this was truly just on a whole other level that I wasn't prepared for. Like I said, Chapter 4, it's just one of the best action films to come out in a very long time, and I think has really just hit a gold standard that we really just get every few years when it comes to the action genre. But this is just really showing what it is capable of when it is operating at the highest level like this film is. Just an absolute thrill ride from beginning to end. Cannot recommend this one enough. I think even if you weren't into the other John Wick films, this one's worth seeing alone, just seeing how they pulled off the gargantuan efforts that they did here. Such a phenomenal film all around. The Zone of Interest will undoubtedly be one of the hardest films to watch for this or any year involving this subject matter, but yet that's entirely the point. This is a film that wants you to not just feel uncomfortable watching it, but really sits in that discomfort and soak in that constant discomfort around you and understand why we might just be part of the problem. While yes, we aren't living next to concentration camps, how many times have you seen an article of something going on, and from a distance you recognize that it's a problem, but yet do absolutely nothing about it? That is the point that this film is trying to make. That is the point that Jonathan Glazer is trying to make with this film, and he does it to absolute perfection here. The way these characters feel so incredibly unbothered, but yet feel that discomfort around them, but yet want to do absolutely nothing about it, want to just continue going about their day like it's any regular Tuesday, basically. The constant ambivalence that they have throughout this film, and how little regard they have to what is really going on. Yet the sound of cries and shrieking that we can hear just from a few buildings away, and how harrowing that is to us, but how little reaction they have, that is what makes this film so incredibly powerful. That is what makes this one of the most horrifying watches of any film from last year. It's the unraveling and the dehumanization of these characters that is really what draws you to this movie. There are so many images here that I'm truly never going to forget. A side story going on as well that kind of works as the antithesis to what's going on and brings about a very interesting theme that I thought worked really well. An ending that just had me absolutely stunned and shaken to my core in a way that I wasn't expecting to, and a very minimal but effective score from Mika Levi that really just haunts you as the film is wrapping up. This is a very hard film to really describe what works so well about it, but yet it is one that you are truly never going to forget in the best way possible. It is an incredibly harrowing watch, and one that I think is definitely going to turn some people off with just how cold it is, but it is intentionally made in that way. It is made in a way to feel apathetic, but yet it has so much humanity present throughout it. There are so many, modern events you can connect to it, and the main main point the film is trying to make is that, the takeaway here should not be you see the Holocaust and you feel that this isn't happening anymore. Stuff like this continues to happen today. It might not be the Holocaust, but there are things like this happening that you know is happening, and yet you haven't done anything about it. And that is exactly what this film is trying to get at. And that kind of subject matter is one that just really lingers with you in a way that I really wasn't prepared to. I was expecting this film to really affect me. I wasn't expecting it to have this constant after effect that continues to nag at me months after seeing it. And that is really just what a powerful a film this potent and this worthwhile can actually do. Zone of Interest is nothing short of one of the most effective films of the entire year, maybe one of the most effective I've seen in several years. And it's one that definitely, like I said, it's not going to work for everybody, but it's one that if you have seen it, truly will never leave you with the impact that it really does give. And that alone is why it deserves to be on this list. All right, well, that was fun being positive for a bit, but now we got to transition back to the worst movies of 2023, going from 5 to 2. So let's go ahead and start off with number 5. My God, where the fuck do I even begin with Children of the Corn? Look, I was not a huge fan of the original movie. It has its moments, it's really cheesy, it's really over the top, and there are definitely moments that made me laugh, but I wouldn't in any way call that a good film. But this is just on a whole other level of bad. I mean, whether it's the horrendously terrible dialogue, one of the first lines in this movie literally being about the difference between a maze and like maze of corn, and for some reason them thinking that's like interesting and like funny to watch. That's the level of humor we're dealing with here. That's the level of shitty dialogue that we're dealing here. The whole movie in general is just such a disaster. It's trying to be so dark and shocking, but it doesn't have any sort of interesting story to it. It doesn't really give us a reason as to why we should really care about any of this. The story is quite literally you have these people who are, living in this town, and, basically, the whole thing pretty, they're trying to, live in this story where they live in this like small farming community, and it's like falling back on hard times, and they try to make things better, but oh my God, every decision they make just worsens things, and everything just kind of keeps going to shit. And then the film just takes a turn halfway through involving one of the worst child performances I think I've ever seen. I don't like to hate on child actors whatsoever because I want them to have a future, and I feel like they'll eventually get better, but my God, Kate Moyer in this movie is so unconvincing as the character of Eden in this movie. The directions that she goes are so unbelievable. I cannot fathom why anyone would approve of this. It also doesn't help that the entire film has the look and feel of a Sci-Fi Channel original film, to the point where you don't understand how this got to theaters, let alone had a major release in theaters. This was in my theater for at least a weekend. It didn't stay there for that long, but it was there for a little bit, and the fact that it even touched theaters to me is just incredible. I mean, look, this was a film that was made, I believe, in like 2020 and has been on the back burner since then, and you can definitely see why. This is just the definition of just a horrible this is just the definition of taking the source material or something simply just to do it. They have zero understanding of what really worked in that story, what the point of it really was supposed to be. It feels like this is a dead property, let's try to do something with it, and what they put together is just easily one of the worst offenses to a horror film that I have seen in a very long time. It's the kind of movie that just kind of gets worse and worse as it goes on. Generally just can't believe that this actually existed, and that this is the film that they actually ended up churning out after all this time of being delayed and things like that. It makes sense why it took so long to come out, but my God, this was just such a horrendous film all around that I cannot believe was even slightly approved. Just one of the worst remakes, requels, sequels, whatever the hell this is to a horror franchise that I have seen in a very long time. Absolute trash all around. I'll be honest, I barely remember the Devil Conspiracy. I watched this movie like forever ago, but what I do remember is that this is a film that has a major identity crisis. On one hand, you have the characters of Archangel Michael and Lucifer and them kind of duking it out, and this really over-the-top sort of B movie that's going on, and that could have actually been really fun if that was the entire movie, but unfortunately, that's not the entire movie. Instead, we have this super boring story about this biotech company that is trying to, clone all these different people, the most influential people in the world and things like that, and we end up meeting this, like, cult of Satanists, and we have this really stupid story of this one woman who's, like, somehow connected to them and things like that, and my god, it is just every possible cliche that you can think of in a horror film turned into one, but yet it feels so much cheaper. It feels like the film doesn't even really want to go for it in terms of scares. There isn't a single moment here that is even slightly scary. There isn't a single moment here that is even slightly shocking, and the moments that are trying to be shocking just come off as cringeworthy. They just come off as unearned and baffling in terms of the reveals they end up going for here. The acting is just at an all-time low here. I don't think there was a single performance in this movie was convincing. Alice Ort Ewing especially is horrendously bad in this movie. I could not stand her in this film. I really did not like her performance whatsoever here. Was completely unconvinced by what she was trying to do, but especially when it comes to Evelyn Hall in this movie is just constantly terrible. I think everything that she did was just one of the worst performances of last year for sure. The twists they end up doing in this, I was so angered at. The direction they end up going was generally just really end up pissing me off. I mean, this just every possible cliche you can think of turned into one, and yet is still somehow worse. The only saving grace are those moments between Archangel Michael and Gabriel. Those are the only moments that got me, but those are so few far in between to what is easily one of the laziest and most insipidly put together horror films I have seen in a while. You didn't see it, and be glad you didn't, because it is generally an unwatchable horror film that I really hope nobody has the misfortune of stumbling across. Listen, like usual with these sort of live-action adaptations of Japanese manga, I am not familiar with the source material of Knights of the Zodiac, but I cannot imagine how embarrassing and just how disrespectful of an adaptation that this must be, because this is generally one of the worst I think live-action fantasy films that I have seen in a very long time. I mean, whether it's the unconvincing acting from basically everybody here, I don't think there's a single actor here, except maybe Mark Dacascos, that actually feels like they are, doing something with this role and giving us a performance that we wouldn't expect from them and really doing something interesting with the role. I don't think there's a single actor that is really doing that here. Nobody really ended up working for me in this movie. The boring and vapid screenplay that we end up getting with the most cookie cutter dialogue and so much exposition that you are just so uninterested in what's going on. The PS2 CW level visual effects, I mean it when I say, like, this literally looks like a show that would have been on the CW in, like, 2017 or something like that. Like, it fits right in. You know the clip that goes around, like, on Twitter? I don't know if it goes around these days, but, like, it's that clip of that scene from, I believe it's, like, The Flash with, like, the Power Rangers and things like that, or even better, The Legend of Tomorrow with, like, that Barack Obama clip, and you have Gorilla Grodd in there. And this fits right in with that stuff. It is that outlandishly bad. It is that cheap. It is that unconvincing. And I generally am just so baffled that they decided to go about the film this way. This overlong climax that just really shows how much of an eyesore the CGI is in this movie. I mean, this was just such a interminable watch all around that I just could not stand whatsoever. And then there's the fact that they have the absolute nerve to end this film with a sequel tease. Like anyone actually cares about this. I mean, this is just such a bottom of the barrel film in every conceivable way. It's trying to be like the next big epic franchise, but all it really is going to do is just really show that, you know what, maybe we're not past the Dragon Ball evolutions, maybe we're not past the Last Airbenders, maybe they're still out there, we just don't see them very much, but every so often we do get them, and my God, I don't know what happened here, but this was just such a badly butchered film that is just such an absolute disaster and one of the worst blockbusters I've seen in a very long time. Very easy to see why this film was essentially buried when it came out. It was basically the big release of that week, but I saw barely anybody talk about it, and thank God for that, because this was just such a lazily made film that I can't believe actually ended up being greenlit in the way that it was. I don't know what they were really thinking. I don't know what anyone's intention was, but I cannot sit here and just imagine that this is the vision that anybody had, because it is such a bottom of the barrel blockbuster in basically every way. There were some bad films for sure last year, but I don't think anything quite there were some bad summer blockbusters out there last year, but I don't think anything came close to just the absolute drivel and quite frankly appallingly bad film that this really was. Look, if you've watched my channel up to this point, you know that Deon Taylor is not a director that I tend to jive very well with. I don't really like the style of his films. I don't really like the way he conveys his films. I don't like the way he, tries to, he tries to insert social commentary, usually coming across in a very haphazard and kind of offensive manner. I'm not really a fan of how he does that. But Fear is very easily his worst film to date. I mean, this is a movie that they try to hype up as this sort of film about your fears coming to life, and yet it barely dives into any of that. The fears that these characters have are so unclear throughout the movie. They happen in such a rushed and hurried manner. We barely have time to really even understand what they're even afraid of. What is really going on with these characters? What is their actual fear? What is the thing that they are so petrified of that is haunting at them? That's barely what this film actually is. Instead, we have all these characters and them going through this scenario and, not trusting each other for some reason and turning against each other when it's so obvious what is actually going on and that none of them are behind this, but these characters are so moronically stupid that you are just constantly shaking your head and just not understanding how anybody could really feel this way. Listen, I understand that, you have to have some characters make some dumb decision in horror movies, but this just takes it to a whole level that I really just couldn't believe in any way. I had such a hard time suspending my disbelief throughout this one. But then there's the other side of this movie that takes this whole film from being a standard horror film and instead tries to make the entire thing an allegory for COVID-19, and really, again, just seems like Deon Taylor's trying to cash in on this trend. Everybody's doing it, so this is my chance to make my movie, but he has so little understanding of what he really wants to do. It feels like this was just shoehorned in at the last second. Like, he didn't know how else to end the movie, so he just threw it in there, and the way it all wraps up, generally, it just makes you go, what the fuck was even the point of watching this movie? What the hell was even the point of going through this entire thing? You're telling me all of this was just leading to that, and that is what we had to sit through for, I don't know, like 90 minutes. I don't even remember how long this movie is. It's like around that length. But listen, Deon Taylor is a director that I haven't enjoyed up to this point, but this film really just gives me very little hope that he's ever going to improve on his worst impulses, and by far his worst effort to date. There are a lot of bad films out there about COVID-19 and things like that, but I don't think any of them came across as haphazard and frankly lame as this one really was. Just easily one of the worst excuses for horror. I feel like I said that a lot in this video, but one of the worst excuses for horror I've seen in a very long time. Oh my God, some of these movies, just talking about them again, just really annoys me. But you know what? You know what's a good way to not feel infuriated anymore, to not feel this level of vitriol towards these movies anymore? Let's just go ahead and talk about some of the best films again. This very uneven video, we're gonna continue the unevenness and talk about the best films. It's at least consistently uneven. It's not like a mess of ideas like some of the worst films we're talking about. At least it has a purpose. It's supposed to be uneven. Okay, enough. I'm gonna stop rambling here. Let's just go to the best films. 5-2. We'll start off. What is number 5? Here we go. All right, enough. Listen, most top 10 lists are probably going to include Oppenheimer on their list, but honestly, it's very much deserved. I think this is one of the most impressive and just well-crafted biopics I have seen in a very long time, mainly because of how different of a biopic it really is. This film is not about building the bomb. Yes, that is part of it, but it is much more about the psychological effect that has on somebody who at one point was trying to invent something that they thought was going to do good, and they thought was going to have a intent, but then it has a completely different intent, and the lingering effect of what that can really do to someone, what that can really the impact of the long-lasting impact of what that can really do. I mean, that's why this film works as well as it does, but also works as this great character study for J. Robert Oppenheimer and what he really is trying to accomplish and the type of person that he really is, and how he has this goal to achieve. He has these certain goals that he wants to achieve, and then how he reacts to achieving those certain goals, I think, is really well done in this movie, and kind of showing how flawed of a person that he really was, not in any way trying to idolize him or anything like that. This is a very multifaceted character, and it takes a great actor like Cillian Murphy to really deliver, but my god, he finally gets that chance to just show how long overdue he has to be in a starring role, and shows so much charisma, but also really just pours so much emotion into a character who very rarely wants to show it. I mean, the gym scene alone is something that I am never going to forget. I'm sure many aren't going to forget it that watch this movie, but he was just phenomenal here. And then you have Robert Downey Jr., who just shows us a range that we never really knew that he had until this movie. I mean, Lewis Strauss is someone who at first seems pretty straightforward, but then becomes so much more intent on exposing Oppenheimer and seeing, how hard that becomes for him and where he ends up going was not at all what I would have expected in this movie. The way this film is constantly showing him through different phases of life, but yet it never feels overstuffed. It utilizes its 3-hour runtime to perfection, all the different things that he gets himself involved in, how it all just kind of unravels towards the end of this movie. Just really ended up taking my breath away. Some of the best sound design I have seen. I mean, Christopher Nolan just continuing to show he's a master at that kind of thing, but again, also just really challenging himself, not doing an action or sci-fi film, having a much more straightforward story, but still putting his own spin on it and having this non-linear structure throughout the movie. I think just heightens what this film is really trying to go for, and does in such an amazing way. The euphoric score from Ludwig Göransson, maybe his best work yet, probably his best work yet, honestly. It's just one of those films that continues to linger the more that you watch it. The long after you have seen it. It's working at the highest caliber possible, and it's just so incredibly groundbreaking. It's the kind of film that people are going to be thinking about for a very long time. When people talk about the best kind of biopics, I think you will be very hard-pressed to not put Oppenheimer into that conversation. This is just one of the best of its kind, and I'm just so happy that this film exists in the way that it does. It is very rare we get a biopic like this today, but thank God we have one of the masters like Christopher Nolan, just showing how differently you can tell this kind of story and make it so incredibly effective as a result. Just one of the best films of last year for sure. I think it's pretty obvious in any year Scorsese makes a movie, it's bound to be on my top 10 list, but Killers of the Flower Moon was such a distinctly different movie from what I expected to be, reframing the story of what used to be solely based around an FBI investigation and telling it more so on the murders themselves and exploring why they ended up happening, but also how they allowed it to happen, how they were able to get away with what they did, despite how moronic so many of these men were. Someone like our main character of Ernest, just how much of an idiot he is and how he constantly is, manipulated by his uncle to perform these dastardly acts, but yet never pushes back. And even when, in the way the film explores that idea of why that would happen, is so incredibly compelling, but also just so infuriating to watch. He's such a pathetic character, but yet DiCaprio gives him such a level of humanity and pathos and does such a great job with that. But Robert De Niro just playing one of the most sinister sinister and despicable characters you will see in anything, movie, TV, anything related last year, just pulls it off in such an amazing way, reminds us of what he can do when he has the right character to sink his teeth into. I mean, William Hale is one of the most evil people ever, I think, and De Niro just portrays that perfectly here. But then Lily Gladstone really bring the heart and soul to this movie as Molly Burkhart, someone who is constantly going through tragedy after tragedy in her life and has very little control over what to do and is so overwhelmed by this situation, but yet at the same time you can see how much she cares about her family, how much she is determined to try to end things even if it is nearly impossible for her to do so. It is just so incredibly well handled. But it's also the respect that Scorsese gives to all of the victims in this movie and all of the tragedy that went down. That's really what lingers with you in this movie. Yes, we've seen this story before about corrupt men and them performing all these terrible acts and eventually catching up to them. But Scorsese is doing it in such a different kind of light here. He's trying to do it in a much more authentic... He's really trying to hold up a mirror to society and really just showcase why something like this goes down, the constant, why something like this was ignored for so long, and does such an amazing job in doing that. It is such a riveting, but also such a heart-wrenching film throughout. An amazing score by Robbie Robertson. I mean, this is the kind of movie that you don't expect a director this far into Scorsese's career to do. You expect him at this point to do something really derivative, something that seems, generic, something that seems similar to what he's done before, and yet still at almost 90 years old at this point, he is still churning out some of the most compelling and some of the most gripping and some of the most memorable at 80 years old at this point, he is still churning out some of the most compelling and some of the most eye-opening films of the entire year, and I cannot wait to see what else he is going to do so late into his career. This is easily one of his best films to date, and one that I truly have not been able to stop thinking about since watching it. It's certainly not an easy watch, but it is a very powerful and a very human one at that, and that's something that Scorsese just does such incredibly well, especially when we're dealing with characters who would be very hard to qualify as humans, but still leave you with that impact that he is able to do and pay this respect to the Osage Nation and everything that they ended up going through. I mean, that is why Scorsese is just one of the best to ever do it, and this film is just another great example of that. Similar to the MCU, this was really not a great year for comic book films at all, but Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse really lived up to every possible expectation, and yet I think even defied some of the expectations that I really did have. I mean, this is just the perfect example of a film that advances the story in such an amazing way and takes Miles Morales in such an interesting journey, focusing on this idea of this canon event and, how Spider-Man is supposed to be, but him kind of trying to question all of that. Why are Spider-Man, why is he so willing to let things happen? Why does he never try to prevent anything? Asking these questions that we just haven't really seen explored in a Spider-Man movie before. And, we've seen films grapple with how difficult it is to be Spider-Man, but this one really dives into the sacrifices one has to make in order to do so and what that really means and having to take on that burden and why someone would want to take on that burden. Why wouldn't someone want to change their fate if they know what their fate is going to be? This film just dived into that so incredibly well, and I think made Miles Morales that much more of a compelling character than he already was. He may just be the most well-developed Spider-Man I think we've ever had, especially if they're leading him towards the direction that they did, but also the way they further Gwen Stacy's character and how she functions as this co-lead and her sort of backstory that we end up getting in this movie and understanding why she makes the choices that she does. I think they do such an incredible job with that. So many great additions here too. Oscar Isaac being an immediate standout in this film, playing such an interesting character in Miguel, the Spot being such a compelling villain that I can't wait to see more of, and really diving into the idea of the long-running consequences that we didn't know Spider-Man would have, but yet does end up having in this movie. This film is just absolutely flawless in terms of what it's able to accomplish and the story that they're trying to tell here. the way they're able to blend so many different animation styles once again in this film, but doing it even more impressive manner. I mean, just the scene alone of them traversing through all these different worlds and the way that goes down, and them, going through all these different iterations of Spider-Man just takes your breath away at every single second. Never once are you able to look away at just the incredible mastery on display here. Just does such an incredible job with that. The great score from Daniel Pemberton, the way they're able to incorporate such a great sense of humor, but also have this great sense of heart, but also set up real stakes for what is to come. Yes, it has a lot of creative and ambitious ideas, but it is doing so much with those ideas and furthering the characters in such an interesting way. All of that is in service of not just building the world, but also furthering these characters. And that's something that I think a lot of films of this nature should try to take a bit of a lesson from. It just does what both a great sequel should do, but also what a great part one of a concluding story should do. I don't know when we're going to get part two at this point, but I really hope that they take all their time they need to on it, because if it is anything even close to this, it will solidify itself as being potentially the best superhero trilogy that is out there. This film just took my breath away at every single second. It's the film I've actually saw the most in 2023, and I am definitely not regretful of that at all. It's one of those films where it gets better and better on every single rewatch. It introduces so many new and exciting elements. It's the kind of level of creativity and the level of character growth that we have been missing in many superhero films, and I cannot wait to see where this film does, where this franchise ends up going from here on out. Like I said, I know they're taking time on this film, but my god, am I going to be chomping at the bit whenever we get any news related to Beyond the Spider-Verse, because this film just absolutely took my breath away. More of this, please. This is absolutely what we need in comic book movie cinema right now. All right, I know what you're going to say. A lot of people did not like this movie. A lot of people just found it just too confusing or headache-inducing or whatever, and fine, I understand that. But I would be lying if I said this was not one of the most effective and powerful films of the year for me. Like, this is the pure definition of the biggest anxiety attack of your life and what happens when you are just constantly fixated on all the worst possible things that can happen to you and all the things that can go wrong at every single second of your life. And I think this film just portrays that perfectly. As someone who very often stresses about the worst things that can happen in any given moment, I mean, I really connected to what Bo was going through. Obviously, the extreme situations are presented in this movie. That's not something that I necessarily think about, but I think the way this film is conveying all of that is so incredibly well done. The ideas of self-hatred, the ideas of abuse, the ideas of control, manipulation, all that stuff is so well presented in this movie. Joaquin Phoenix just giving such an incredible performance here. Yes, he very much is the audience here, but he also is playing someone who you are so aware of how he is feeling at every given moment. He has so little control over the world that he inhabits, and the way that starts to bother him in this movie, the way that starts, the ride that he ends up going through, the arc that he has throughout this movie is so incredibly well handled. But Patti LuPone, I mean, my god, just gives such a memorable and show-stopping performance in the movie. I really wish more people talked about. I think she was just incredible in this film. I loved what she ended up doing. Yes, this film went in so many weird and bizarre directions, but with every direction it went in the more bizarre it got, the more I just was so enamored by what the film was trying to do. Ari Aster is definitely not going to be a director for everyone, but this just really shows what he's able to do when he is at his most unhinged, when he is able to fully dive into a film that is unlike anything he's done before. He really challenged himself with this, very dark comedy, very weird imagery, really just taking what he has showcased in his other films and bring it into such a in such a more maddening and frequently stressful setting, and doing it in such a to an insane degree here. But again, doing it in a way that feels so incredibly fulfilling. This film was just such a wild ride. Night that I really just have not been able to stop thinking about since I saw it. Like I said, I know it wasn't everyone's jam, but it very much did end up working for me. Definitely a film that I would proceed with caution considering how people were responding to it, but it is one that I absolutely would be damned if I said it was not a film that just gripped, that had me shook at what was going on, that had me so on the edge of my seat the entire time, and had such a huge reaction out of me, and one of the best portrayals, I think, of anxiety that I have seen in a very long time. Just an absolute work of art, and just another example of why Ari Aster is just one of the absolute best working today. Not just one of the best in horror, but I think he is one of the best working today. And as the kids say today, I will be seated to see whatever cooks up in his incredibly twisted and albeit very deranged mind. All right, so with that said, we are almost there, guys. We are almost to the end of this video, but there's one last thing to do, and that is go to my worst and best film of 2023. We're going to go ahead and end off the worst here, and I think you might know what it is. It's really one of the only movies I reviewed last year, and it's one that I think you kind of might have an idea of what it might be, but of course it is... Holy shit, Alone at Night. I mean, there's a lot of films last year where I constantly think, like, why did I watch this? Why did I even bother with this? But no film gives me that feeling more than Alone at Night. This is just the kind of film that cannibalizes itself almost instantly based on its structure. It's trying to be this sort of, cabin in the woods type horror film where you have this girl who is on OnlyFans. She is trying to clear her head. She's gone through this really bad breakup, and, she's stuck in the woods, and she's, meeting all these guys and things like that, and then this killer, she ends up getting stuck by this killer of sorts, and oh my god, there's a killer on the loose, and who's it's going to be? And for some reason, they try to pair that up with this weird parody of a reality show that Paris Hilton is hosting during COVID, trying to get people to date, and for some reason they thought those two things would somehow blend together and not make this film so incoherent at every turn and make it so incredibly unwatchable. Every time you're even slightly invested in what's going on, the film cuts to something completely unrelated, and it is by far one of the worst things I think I've honestly ever seen. The acting is just so unconvincing from nearly everyone. Every reveal that this had, it thinks it's being so shocking and so unpredictable, but it is literally the most obvious shit that you could have possibly come up with. So that part of the movie already is terrible. Ashley Benson can't even save this film. She looks like she'd be literally want to be anywhere else in this movie than she is here. But then you have the reality side of things, which is the most cringe-inducing and just over-the-top parody that I think I've ever seen. And as someone who does watch a good amount of reality TV, not this kind of shit, I watch like reality competitions, this is not at all what it really should be. There's so much more they could be making fun of. There's so much more they could be parodying, and instead it just feels like the movie is not doing enough with it. Doesn't understand what really works in this premise, and then they have the audacity to try to blend the two things together, and the entire film just ends up sinking after that. This was just such a disaster from start to finish. I could not believe what I was really seeing, but it's just the kind of film where I just really wish I had not watched. There's so many films out there that I question what they were really thinking making it, but this is the kind of movie where I generally just can't understand what was going through their head and what this was really supposed to be. There isn't a single thing here that I can recommend. There isn't a single thing here that I think is even slightly interesting. Every idea this film has, it completely blows up in its face. I mean, just a complete catastrophe from start to finish. There were a lot of bad horror films last year, but really nothing compared to the level of Alone at Night. fights. This is just the worst possible level this is just the worst possible example of what you can deliver when you have the most recycled ideas possible, but think you're being revolutionary with it. I was just so incredibly angered and annoyed watching this movie. Annoyed is honestly an understatement. This was just one of the worst films I've seen in a very long time. Avoid this one as much as you can. There's a lot of movies here that I really wish you didn't see, but please, even if you're slightly invested, do not even bother watching this one. All right, so now that we've gotten all the rage out of the way, let's just go ahead and transition to the final movie we're talking about here, which is the #1 movie of 2023. And look, there were a lot of contenders here. For a long time, Beau is Afraid was #1, and I didn't think anything else was going to surpass it. And then the end of the year came, and there was one film that truly just took my breath away in a way that I wasn't ready for. And that movie, of course, is... Poor Things is generally one of the most fearless and creative films that I think I have ever seen. Yorgos Lanthimos has already asserted himself as a director of these very bizarre and twisted films that are kind of these allegories for classic stories, but this film just takes that to a whole new level, telling the story of this very unorthodox, situation where you have this character Bella who was, she has the brain of a toddler, but the body of an adult woman. And while, yes, it's a story of Frankenstein, essentially, seeing this woman who is so helpless and, pretty much start off the film so helpless and naive of the world around her, we really see her discover herself and become so much more autonomous with who she is and kind of defy societal norms in that way. And that's what I really appreciate about this film, is that you can use Bella Baxter as a way to kind of question certain etiquette. She's questioning things that other people simply wouldn't, and I really love the way the film just dives into all of that, the way this whole film just becomes about a woman and her kind of discovering herself, whether it be sexually, whether it be emotionally, or whether it just be through who she is as a person. I think just is so incredibly beautiful, but it's also absolutely hysterical. I mean, there's no film that made me laugh harder last year than Poor Things, so much so that the second time I saw this movie, there was a woman who told me she couldn't handle my cackle throughout the movie. So yeah, that was a fun experience for sure. I don't know why I'm bringing this up now, but I haven't had a chance to bring it up, so I'm doing that now. Emma Stone giving just literally one of the best performances I've ever seen, just showcasing her versatility as an actress, convincing us that she is Bella Baxter and transforming herself in a way that we just haven't really seen before, in a performance that for the first 20 or so minutes is almost completely wordless and growing more and more mature as the film goes on, and really taking us on this arc in a way that very few actors can do. Mark Ruffalo also really pushing himself to his limits as an actor, playing a kind of role that we've really never seen from before, but I really hope we get to again, because he is just phenomenal in this movie. Willem Dafoe, Rami Youssef, I mean, so many incredible actors here. But again, it's the way that Yorgos Lanthimos conveys this story, what he's really trying to do, I think is just so impressive here. Bella Baxter, her journey, I mean, no doubt for me is the best character arc of last year, and where she ends up going. The way that she's constantly told by everyone how to act and yet is trying to defy all of that. And while the film is trying to tackle, female empowerment, it's also saying so much about just the idea of, I think, just being reborn. If you could be reborn again, what would you do differently? What would you, what would you try to change about your life? And that is what this film is really trying to get at, and it does it in such an incredible way. Such visceral and imaginative cinematography that takes us into this almost futuristic Victorian era that I think is just so spellbinding to look at. This mesmerizing score that is just so ingenious, that starts off similarly to Bella, completely out of tune, but becomes this full-fledged sort of euphoric euphoric symphony by the end of it. So incredibly well done in that way. This is just the kind of movie that just really reminds me why I love cinema as much as I do. It's absolutely Yorgos Lanthimos' magnum opus, in my opinion. Left me so awestruck with what it ended up doing. It's one of the most risky films I've seen in a very long time, and I can totally understand why a lot of people didn't really like it, but for me, I was just completely locked into this from beginning to end. I love the story that Yorgos Lanthimos was trying to tell. I love the way he ended up conveying here. I love what the film is trying to say about identity. I love what the film is trying to say about, about control and, you controlling yourself and individualizing yourself and things like that. I think the film has so much to say about that. And it really just shows how underneath all of the raunchiness, underneath all of the weird and just straight up outlandish elements that this film ends up having is a very human story that I think many are going to be able to relate to in such an amazing way. And that's something that only the greatest storytellers are really able to do. And after this film, I would absolutely assert Yorgos Lanthimos as such. There's really no film I've been able to stop thinking about. I haven't been able to stop thinking about more than Poor Things. Just the artistry, the themes of what it's going for, the way it conveys its characters, and the way it's able to, balance this tone of this really dark and twisted comedy, but then go into some really emotional and hard-hitting moments is just ingenious to watch. And yet it does it in such a graceful and effortless manner. It's just everything I really do want in a film, and for all those reasons and more, it is absolutely my number one film of 2023. All right, so like I said, that was a very different video than I'm used to, and I know that, like I said, it might not have been the most coherent video, but I'm really happy that I was able to do this. I haven't really done a top 10 list in a while. I didn't do one at all for 2022, so I really just wanted to kind of make up for it here. I know it's late, and I know a lot of these movies, it's like, we saw these forever ago, Kevin, we don't really care about your opinion on them, but I'm trying to do what I can, like I said, to just really put more effort into YouTube this year, and I wouldn't feel like I'm really doing that if I didn't at least try to do this video. And so I'm really happy that I was able to do that. Hopefully this year, the 2024 video will come out a lot earlier than this one. It's not going to be May of next year that comes out, but we will just have to see what ends up happening with that. But other than that, guys, over this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, comment down below, let me know what your most worst and best movies of 2023 really are. Like I said, I think overall a pretty good year. I think that, yes, there were a lot of films that disappointed, but I think for indie films and, these really gargantuan epics, I think it was a really great year overall, and I'm really excited to see what else 2024 really has in store. Been an interesting year so far, I'll say that. I don't know if it's gonna be, to the level of 2023, but we'll see. But other than that, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.